Cass, today let's talk about how the Beatles were received by music critics and intellectuals. They got that sort of attention immediately, even with some of the early songs that seem, well, so simple.
Yeah, even though they sort of started out as a pop band, a fad, a lot of intellectual heavyweights sat up and took notice as soon as they started recording their early hits.
So that's what we're looking at today. It's this huge irony, really. You have these academics applying incredibly complex classical music theory to pop songs written by musicians with, well, virtually no formal training at all.
And that's the moment it all changed. It's how rock and roll went from being, just frivolous teenage entertainment to being considered serious art.
So where does it all begin? I think we have to start with the real pivot point. It's December 27th, 1963.
Right. William Mann. He's the classical music critic for the Times of London, a very, very serious publication.
And he writes this review that it sets a whole new framework for how people thought about them.
He used this incredibly dense language. I mean, he's analyzing their song Not a Second Time, and he points to the Aeolian cadence at the end.
And then he compares it to Mahler, Gustav Mahler's Song of the Earth.
Exactly. It's an insane comparison to make at the time. A pop song and a massive classical symphony.
And he didn't just stop there, did he? It wasn't just that one term.
Oh, no, he just kept going. He talked about the chains of Pandiatonic clusters in this boy.
Okay, let's break that down. What does that even mean for you listening at home?
It's basically using chords from one scale, but not in the way you're supposed to. It creates this kind of shimmering, ambiguous sound. He also mentioned major tonics, sevenths and ninths, and flat submediant key switches.
So in plain English, he was hearing things in their music that sounded jazzy or classical, whether they meant to put them there or not.
Right. And his big conclusion was that Lennon and McCartney were the outstanding English composers of 1963. He put them right next to Franz Schubert.
The great irony, though, is that central term he used, the Aeolian cadence.
Yeah, musicologists still debate that one. The progression he's talking about in Not a Second Time is just stush. It's a G major chord moving to an E minor chord.
That's it. That's what he's making all this fuss about.
That's it. So the thinking is he either just, made up the term to describe a sound he liked, or maybe he just had a mental slip. But it didn't matter. The fancy language did its job.
Which brings us to the Beatles' reaction. And this is really the core of it all, leading to one of John Lennon's most famous quotes.
Right. In his 1980 Playboy interview, he looked back on all that and said, "To this day, I don't have any idea what they are. They sound like exotic birds."
It just perfectly sums up their whole approach. It was all instinct.
But he was also really smart about it. He knew exactly what that kind of analysis did for them.
Yeah, in the Beatles anthology, he admitted that all that fancy terminology was what helped them become acceptable to the intellectuals.
He saw the value in it, even if he thought the analysis itself missed the point. He had this quote from 1973 where he said, "Intellectuals have the problem of having to understand it. They can't feel anything."
For him, it was all about feeling. It wasn't about theory. I mean, he wrote Not a Second Time because he was trying to write a Smokey Robinson song.
Not because he was thinking about Mahler. And Paul never learned to read music. Their genius came from, thousands of hours of playing in clubs, just honing their ears until they instinctively knew what sounded right.
But if they're all instinct, there has to be a bridge. There's a missing link between that raw creativity and the polished record.
And that is George Martin, the essential translator.
He had the formal training they didn't. Studied at the Guildhall School of Music. He understood what William Mann was talking about.
But the magic of that partnership was that he never forced it on them. George Harrison said Martin was always there to interpret our strangeness, not to correct it.
You just imagine the conversations in the studio. Martin would suggest an instrument.
And they wouldn't even know what it was. He'd say, "How about an oboe?" And they'd have to ask, "No, which one's that one?"
Exactly. Or the famous story with Yesterday. Martin wanted a string quartet.
And Paul was completely against it. He thought it sounded schmaltzy, old-fashioned.
So Martin didn't give him a lecture on counterpoint.
No, he just sat down and played the arrangement for him in the style of Bach. He made Paul feel it, and that's what convinced him. Martin was translating feeling into technique.
And that role just became more and more important as they got more experimental, like with Tomorrow Never Knows. John didn't ask for a phaser or a flange effect. He said he wanted to sound like the Dalai Lama chanting from a mountaintop.
That's an impossible request in a 1966 studio. But Martin and the engineers, Jeff Emmerich and Ken Townsend, they figured it out.
They ran his voice through a Leslie speaker cabinet. the rotating speaker from a Hammond organ.
And suddenly you have that otherworldly, swirling vocal. They made the impossible happen. The studio became another instrument.
And by 1967, the establishment had fully caught up. This wasn't just one critic in London anymore.
No, this was the big one. April 1967, a CBS documentary called Inside Pop, The Rock Revolution. And the host is Leonard Bernstein.
Conductor of the New York Philharmonic, composer of West Side Story. I mean, it doesn't get more legitimate than that.
And there he is, sitting at a piano, breaking down Good Day Sunshine and She Said, She Said. He's pointing out all the unexpected key and temper changes.
He basically took what Mann started and made it official. He even compared their songwriting structures to Bach and Schumann.
And his final verdict, he called Lennon and McCartney the finest songwriters since George and Ira Gershwin. It was done. Rock was officially art.
What's also so interesting is how the competition was fueling this, too. It wasn't just critics pushing them, it was their peers.
Absolutely. You have this amazing artistic rivalry going on, especially with Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys.
Rubber Soul comes out in late '65.
And Brian Wilson said he was just blown away. He said it made him want to get in the studio and cut a record immediately, that it felt like a complete artistic statement.
So Rubber Soul directly inspires Pet Sounds.
And then Pet Sounds comes out, and it blows the Beatles away. It pushes them to go even further with what became Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
It's this wonderful competitive bug, as Wilson called it.
And it was so gracious. There was a poll in late '66 where the Beach Boys were voted ahead of them.
And Ringo just said, we're all 4 fans of the Beach Boys. Maybe we voted for them.
Yeah.
That kind of mutual respect just pushed everyone higher.
You can see that push reflected in how they started to view the album itself. George Martin said Rubber Soul was the first time they thought of an album as a bit of art in their own right.
And John said, in my life, from that album was his first real major piece of work. It came after a journalist asked him why he didn't write songs that were as personal as his books.
It was a huge personal shift, but the real explosion in the studio, the quantum leap, that was Revolver in 1966.
You can just look at the numbers. They recorded their entire first album in about 12 hours.
An entire album.
Rubber Soul took less than 80 hours for Revolver.
Over 220 hours. And that time wasn't just polishing. It was pure invention. They were becoming a studio-only band.
They were asking these wonderfully simple, curious questions. Like, what happens if we play this tape backwards?
Or speed it up.
Oh.
Or slow it down. They started using very speed editing all the time, changing the whole texture of their voices and instruments.
They were building songs out of tape loops, superimposing noises, crossfading tracks.
And Tomorrow Never Knows is the absolute peak of that. You have the backwards guitar, the tape loops, the Leslie speaker vocal.
All of it floating over this steady, repetitive drum and bass drone. It's totally radical. They were just following their ears into completely uncharted territory.
Which brings us right back to that beautiful paradox. All those sophisticated things the critics heard, the Aeolian cadences, the complex harmonies, they were real.
But the Beatles found them through instinct. Through endless practice and obsessive listening and just musical curiosity.
They trusted their ears, not a textbook. The critics needed the fancy terms to give rock music legitimacy.
And that legitimacy, in turn, gave every artist who came after them permission to be just as ambitious, just as experimental.
The genius wasn't in what they knew. It was in their absolute willingness to push any boundary just because something sounded cool, and that changed everything.
So what does this all mean for you? Consider the true irony of instinct. What other art forms, literature, painting, film, have been legitimized not by the academic credentials of the creators, but simply by the undeniable quality of their intuitive work? Think about that paradox. Well, thanks for joining us today. Whenever you feel like knowing more about the Beatles, visit us at BeatlesRewind.com. Every day, we do something new there. Song reviews, album reviews, movie reviews, documentaries, trivia, all things Beatles, every day, 8 days a week. You can find us on the website, BeatlesRewind.com. You can subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Amazon Podcasts, practically anywhere on the intertubes. The Beatles, all day, every day. We'll do it again tomorrow.
Right. Talk to you soon.
Until next time, when you listen.
Your mind conducts its own symphony.